Well, I'm Dr. Beth Geothe.
And I'm Dr. Martha Leatherman. We're here today to talk to you about sexual issues affecting persons with dementia, as well as sexual issues sometimes associated with aging. This is the second of two 20-minute segments on this topic. Both of the segments are available through www.mmlearn.org. And you can see that on the slide up there. The sections build on one another, so we'd like for you to try to watch them in order, but you don't have to watch them at one sitting. And take your time and go through them at your own pace. And we hope that you'll find some interesting ways to address any sexual behavior problems you might be experiencing.
Now, in the first segment, we talked about how private sex is all right, but when sex becomes public, then it becomes a problem. And we talked about 3 reasons why sexual behavior can go from being private to being public. As you see in this slide, there are the 3 reasons. And in the first segment, we discussed the circumstances in which a person lives. Now, in this segment, we're going to cover more inappropriate sexual behaviors and the reasons those occur, memory and perceptual changes, and frontal lobe problems.
Well, we keep saying we're going to talk about inappropriate sexual behaviors, and we will. But it occurred to me that one of the problems that happens in a couple situation where one of the partners has dementia is the question about, is sexual behavior really inappropriate or not? And I know that one of your pet peeves is talking about someone with dementia as having the mind of a child. And that really can come into play when we're talking about sexual behaviors.
That's right. Many professionals will discuss the deterioration of the mind in Alzheimer's in the same way that a reverse aging process occurs, so that the person develops into an adult, but then when the dementia strikes, their mind starts to regress. In other words, it's like an aging backwards. Well, the problem with that is this. I had a gentleman tell me one time that he took his wife to a psychologist to be evaluated for Alzheimer's. And the psychologist said, yes, she does have Alzheimer's. She actually has the mind of a 6-year-old. Now, that's one way to convey to people the severity of dementia. But, you know, that the mind is a complicated thing, and you can't just point to someone and say, that person operates at this age. Mm-hmm. The brain matures at different rates and in different abilities. So the problem with that is that this lady, even though maybe for money management she might have had the brain of a 6-year-old because the dementia had robbed her of any arithmetic skills and understanding of money, she still had the emotional experiences and the emotional maturity, and she still had that emotional relationship with her husband. Now, unfortunately, his dilemma was that he felt like he was having sex with a 6-year-old, and so it really was a bother.
The guilt must have been horrible.
Oh, it was awful, and he really was missing that intimate relationship, and yet he didn't feel like he could be affectionate toward her even. Now, you know, let's take an example here to talk about how the brain develops. Again, you can't assign an age and say that a person can do all these things because they are functioning at this age level. Let's say a 10-year-old is operating with the physical agility or the musical ability of a 25-year-old. Well, you wouldn't say that the 10-year-old can then go ahead and get his driver's license.
It's not like he has the brain of a 25-year-old.
Right, doesn't have the same level of judgment. Likewise, dementia does not rob people of their entire faculties all at the same rate and all at one time. Just because someone has memory problems doesn't mean that they're sexually innocent now. And just because someone has dementia doesn't mean that you have to treat them as a complete innocent as a child.
You know, people with dementia will recognize the people that they love, and they will recognize their spouses as their spouses for a long time during the illness. And there is a basic primal need for intimacy that people have that dementia does not rob them of. And in some cases, the dementia actually brings that to the fore a little bit more for reasons we'll talk about later. So just because someone has dementia does not mean that they don't need physical touch, that they don't need intimacy, that they don't need sex. Touch is beneficial in aging, and it's been shown in all kinds of different studies that it helps people with depression, they live longer, they eat better, and they are happier and more content. So while that's true, we do want to be sensitive to the question of sexual exploitation of someone with dementia and what that really means.
Right.
Well, it means the same thing that it does in any other case. Can the person consent? Does the person recognize what's going on? Because even with dementia, if there are activities happening, whether it's getting a shot, whether it's having a medical procedure, or whether it's having intercourse, that person, up until very far into the illness, can say no and will say no. It's very unusual that that doesn't happen. And certainly in the case that you're talking about, this man and his wife still had meaningful communication. And she presumably was enjoying the intimacy and was able to consent all along the way.
You know, what happened in this case, actually, is this gentleman was in a family support group for people who take care of someone with Alzheimer's. And this is exactly the approach that the other group members, who were women, took with him. They asked him questions like, does she respond to you when you make overtures? Does she seem to enjoy the activity? Is it a calming kind of situation, a comfortable situation? And he answered yes to those questions. And they were able to recommend to him that, you know, you're having consensual sex and you have to separate the disease from your loved one. Now, the fact of dementia in this situation didn't cause problems with the sexual expression. But there is a situation in which dementia can cause problems. And we alluded to this a little earlier. Because of memory and perception problems, a person with dementia may not be able to identify family members or may misidentify people as family members. For instance, when an adult child looks like one of the parents and the parent with dementia will think that, say, the daughter is actually the wife. You have a better way to explain this.
Well, our society is very, very sensitized to incest and child exploitation. And it's happened often in my practice where a situation such as this will happen. So I want you to take home that if this has happened to you, or if it does happen to you, you're not alone. And don't think it's unusual or you've done something horrible or shameful. Again, this can be part of the dementia. Let me explain. Often someone who is widowed has an adult child who visits and takes care of him or her. And I'll tell you that more often it's the case in which the daughter will take care of a widowed father. But it certainly does happen the other way. What can happen and become very upsetting is when the father with memory problems and perception problems begins to make sexual overtures to the daughter. And the reason that happens is, if you think about it, the daughter looks like her mother looked 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
And she's caring for him. Do you want something to eat? She's having these same kind of interactions that the mother may have had.
Like greeting him with a hug and a kiss.
Right, with a hugging, sitting next to him on the bed, helping him perhaps button his shirt or straighten his tie. So that if you realize that the perceptual changes are from the dementia, and it's not Dad being a dirty old man, you can understand why he sees this daughter as a spouse. He's just showing appropriate affection to someone he has misidentified.
So you see, when inappropriate sexual behavior occurs in this situation, you have to recognize that it's the brain changes rather than some moral failing or some intentionally planned creepy old man kind of behavior. This doesn't mean, though, that you have to allow it to happen because, well, it's just a part of dementia and it's just something that we have to put up with.
Just because you have to understand it doesn't mean you have to allow it.
No, and it also doesn't mean that you can never see your parent again, because when you see them from now on, they're going to try and fondle you. It does not mean that. You have to figure out how to get around this, and by doing that, what you have to really do is become part of the brain, part of their brain that's not working, so that you can manage the situation better.
You have to manage the situation to reduce the likelihood that your parent will misinterpret a situation. So, for example, if you're visiting, you probably don't want to sit on the bed next to your parent. If possible, you should allow professional caregivers. And, you know, whenever I see people, particularly if it's in a nursing home or a dementia care unit, I always wear my white coat. I never wear casual clothing so that I make real clear what those boundaries are.
And if they need anything, I usually say, I'm not trained to do that, so I'll go get a nurse. So I'm not trying to help them out of bed or help them in the toilet.
The other thing that you can do is continue to talk to your parent and gently and sensitively remind him or her in the conversation about what the boundaries are. So, remember your granddaughter, my daughter, really likes to ride horses, and Mother would have liked how she, whatever it is. So in that way, you're not saying, Dad, I'm your daughter, I'm not your wife, but you're, in a sensitive way, without embarrassing him, reminding him of the relationship.
Right. And, you know, just using the terms mom or dad, whatever you called them, often in the conversation will be a subtle reminder of the relationship rather than reprimanding or, as you said, embarrassing the person. Now, you can see how memory problems can affect sexual behavior. And the next part of this, memory and perception problems, the next part of this, though, is a particularly difficult situation for people. Now, you remember the highly publicized situation of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor's husband. He had very severe dementia, and the family had to place him in a dementia care facility. Well, he started a relationship, a romantic relationship, with another one of the residents in the facility. And because he'd forgotten he was married. He had no memory that he had been married or was married, and in addition to that, the compound of that was that he didn't even recognize family members. He didn't even recognize Justice O'Connor as his wife. Now, the family brought this to the public awareness as a way to increase knowledge about dementia, the effects of dementia.
I thought they handled that beautifully.
They did.
And I've seen so many situations in which staff members were very upset because they think it's cheating or adultery. But, you know, we really, if someone has to live in a memory center or dementia center, the whole process of this is trying to help them find that place as home. Consequently, if they're living with someone of the opposite sex in that home, those kind of relationships are going to develop. And so we have to be understanding of the process that causes that. Remember what we said earlier about the primal need for intimacy. You are in your home. You need intimacy. And Justice O'Connor said publicly that she was happy that her husband had found someone who could give him intimacy and whom he loved at this time when otherwise he would have been without anyone because he had no memory of her. And you know, that's been the response of all the families that I've ever worked with. If it's approached and they understand what's happening with the brain, they've been very understanding of this kind of situation. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not sadness, that there is not grief, that there's not loss, but even anger. But it's at the disease itself. And again, they're able to separate the disease and what it's doing to the brain from the person that they love.
You know, if this happens to you or if it's happened and you're still having difficulty with it, this is a great time to engage in some counseling on the situation or a family support group. Just like the man earlier discussed his situation with a support group. You can get a little bit of perspective and a little bit more comfort and support, even though you may be too embarrassed or uncomfortable to bring up the situation. Remember, even though you have those feelings, you can still cope with things like this.
You know, it says a lot about the power of the support groups for these families, that this is one man in a group of many women who felt comfortable enough bringing this up to them, and that they were able to talk frankly to him. These situations are hugely helpful, and if there's one message we'd like to give you, it's don't isolate yourself in some kind of shame. There are places that you can reach out, because you can't be expected to handle all of this by yourself.
That's exactly right. And it also says a lot about Justice O'Connor's family, that they were able to talk about it as a family.
In public.
In public, so that they brought to the forefront the issue of being able to talk about these things. Well, now let's talk about the third reason for problem sexual behaviors, and that is the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes help control our social behavior, among many other things. And lots of behaviors can occur because of the damage to the frontal lobes by the dementia. But for this particular discussion, we're going to talk about three changes that occur in the frontal lobe. Disinhibition, impulsivity, and lack of awareness of consequences all work together in someone who has dementia to cause maybe aggressive sexual behavior, unwanted sexual behavior, and sexual behavior that occurs in public.
Now, the frontal lobes are part of our brain that are damaged in dementia. And we don't normally see that damage unless we do some complicated X-ray kinds of things, but we see the behavior that results from that damage. So, for example, a woman in the dining room might repeatedly grope in the lap, trying to grab the penis of the man who sits next to her, or in an activity, and this is happening in public. She's being pretty aggressive, and this is very unlike her past behavior. Mom would never have done that. She was always such a lady. I can't believe she's doing this. Are you sure that you're not you're not missing something else, or you're talking about somebody else? And even though the man slaps her hand away every time, and the staff tells her to stop that, they reprimand her, she doesn't stop. The reason she doesn't stop is because the frontal lobe is broken. She can't stop. Just like when somebody's drunk and does many things that they never would have done, or if they've been under some kind of anesthesia for a minor surgery, and they say things coming in or out of the anesthesia, it's like, oh my goodness, I never meant to say that. People with dementia and frontal lobe disease do things that they would not have done otherwise. And when they have an impulse to do something, they just do it. They can't stop. It just goes. It happens.
That's right. It's sort of a stimulus boundedness. Like when a person with dementia sees a door, they just go through the door. They're not thinking about where does this door go? What am I going to do once I get through the door? They just see the door, they go through it. They see food, they eat it.
Even if it's on somebody else's plate.
Right, at the dinner table. So, and you don't think of those kind of behaviors, wandering or eating off of other people's plates, as being something shameful and something horrible. You think, well, that's part of the dementia. And it's, no, Mom wouldn't have gone out in traffic when she didn't have dementia. So you can separate your loved one from the disease. So it's the same thing in this situation where the woman saw this man and wanted to touch him. Frontal lobe problems can occur before memory problems in many forms of dementia. Even though other kinds of social behavior like greetings and basic conversation and ability to move around are still intact, so that the frontal lobe problems show up first. But the big issue here is to separate the disease from the person, from your loved one.
We have said before that sexual behavior, sexual needs are primal impulses. They are very basic. They're like need for food and shelter and warmth. And what we do as we get older, from the time we're toddlers to when we're older, is that we actually put barriers to that behavior in place. So it's behavior that's always there that we learn over time to stop. And we learn that through the frontal lobes. And so when the frontal lobes break down, those barriers are gone and the behavior just sort of bursts through. And the mistake that people make is in saying, now stop that. You know that's ugly. You know that's wrong. Mr. Jones doesn't like that. The person may say, oh, that's right. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm sorry.
But because of the dynamics of situations and the impulsivity, that you put them in the situation again and the behavior happens again. So you have to be the part of the brain that person has lost, the frontal lobes, and manage the environment, much like we were talking about earlier. Don't sit on the bedside with them. Be careful how you approach people.
And redirect with other activities.
That's right.
Not just don't do that, but Mrs. Jones, why don't we come over here and do whatever? And not all touching, impulsive touching, is sexual. You have to think that perhaps the person is just trying to reach out and get some sort of physical contact and comfort, and they happen to reach for a penis, but nonetheless, they may need some comfort. I had a person one time who said, all I really want is to lie down in my bed and hold hands with someone. That was all he wanted. So we learned how to work with that, and he did actually find someone in his dementia care facility who enjoyed holding hands. But even things like neutral sorts of touching, like massaging a person's hand with lotion. Brushing their hair.
Right, yeah. Those kind of things can be comforting.
That's right. And sometimes people just want the sense of touch. I know that there's a lot of consternation and discomfort when sometimes people with severe dementia actually play with their own feces. If you can give them some kind of soft plush toy to hold and to play with, that can substitute in for the need of touch that they have.
And regardless of what kind of tips you hear or suggestions we're even making here, what you really need to do is evaluate the situation, start that conversation. You're allowed to be uncomfortable, but you're not allowed to just let it go on without any sort of management.
We hope this was helpful. We hope that you'll be able to cope now a little bit more when embarrassing and uncomfortable things like this come up. Remember, it's the disease and not your loved one that's the problem. Thank you very much.
Thanks.